Right, certain things people take so seriously, even if they're maybe less important. Yeah. It's a very interesting question. Like, you say, I'm a frum person, I want to keep all of the halacha, but nobody keeps all of the halacha. And often what people take the most serious may be less important than things that they just forget about. So there's a nice story about this. The Shagas Aryeh, who was one of the greatest Achronim, he was the Rav of Volozhin before Rav Chaim of Volozhin, and in fact he was the Rav of Rav Chaim of Volozhiner's father, or parents. And Rav Chaim Volozhin, the Shagas Aryeh often got fired. He often had to look for different rabbanuses from city to city because he had certain psukim that were not always accepted. And one famous case, he declared that a certain minhag of the city was improper, and they fired him. So the Shagas Aryeh says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu really made a big mistake when he put the Aseres HaDibros in the Torah. Because if he would have put the Aseres HaDibros in your notebook of minhagim, everybody would keep it. Nebuch, it's in the Torah, so it's less important to people. Or some people say that the way culture works is a yesh omrim in the Ramah is much more significant than a pasuk in the Chumash. A yesh omrim. So it's a very, very good question. And part of it is, there's a certain amount of gaiva, arrogance, when a person can follow like an esoteric chumrah that nobody ever heard about. That separates him from the crowd. If he's only doing what the Torah says, there's no cachet in that. There's no glory in that. But the other thing is that Yetzer Haras are stronger in certain areas. I mean, for example, Lashon Hara. Things like that, stealing, being a little dishonest in business. Yeah, those are the chomor shebechamuros. Those are the most severe. But precisely in those cases, you're going to find a tremendous Yetzer Hara. So I think there's a combination of kind of the sociology of wanting to be special, coupled with Yetzer Haras in certain areas, that results in, frankly, what is called a distortion. Maybe I shouldn't use this as an example, but there were situations, I won't mention any names at all, but there were situations where people who were fairly prominent in the Torah community were accused of sexual molestation of minors and abuse. Pretty serious stuff. And when they died, there were Gedolim who came and gave great hespedim for the good that the person did. On the other hand, you have somebody who might write a book that maybe the age of the earth is more than 5785, and that person's going to be put in cherem, denounced, and called an apikoros. So you actually have a situation where a person who espouses a different age of the earth shiur is going to be much more condemned than a person who abused minor children. So there is, I think, something a little wrong with that picture, but you're right. It's something that we need to be aware of. It's a good point. Okay, anything? Yeah.
One of the reasons that people give in not supporting or praying for the Medina is because the Medina was founded by people who were anti-religious or not religious. Provided that many groups of Haredim vote in the government, why do people consider the Medina something that's not holy? If many things that started off bad can become holy, like David being from Ruth, who was a descendant of Balak, or the Imahot coming from Lavan or Betuel.
Yeah. It's an excellent question. The question, again, I repeat the question for the camera. I didn't always pick up. The question is that many people say that Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel, not Eretz Yisrael, the state of Israel, cannot be regarded as a holy thing, simply because the founders of the state were not only non-religious, but to a large degree actually anti-religious in some ways. So by definition, the state itself is tainted with the origins of those who did not believe in God or did not believe in the Torah. And now I do want to point out, just to remind people, that is not the Neturei Karta ideology. Neturei Karta ideology is a state is wrong even if it would be totally religious until Mashiach comes. Okay, but putting aside Neturei Karta and just focusing on that, your question is that origins are not determinative. Things can start off bad, but then they could be used as a catalyst for things that are very, very positive. So Lot had incest with his daughters, and from them came Ammon and Moab, and from Moab came Ruth. and from Rus comes David, and from David comes Mashiach and Geula, and there are many, many things. Bilam, who was a big Rasha, his curses were turned by Hashem to a bracha. So the question would be, should we be so concerned with the origins of things if Lamaisa we can see that things can develop in a positive way? That surely is an argument. The question becomes, some people feel things did not turn out as positive as it should have been, meaning to say there may be a circumstance where the taint or the orientation continues to exist. Again, I'm not expressing my own personal idea there, but all I'm saying is the notion, well, just like Ammon and Moab resulted in Mashiach, so too the state of Israel resulted in what, right? So I think the what is part of the debate, meaning I agree with you that our stance should not be predicated on an origin issue. Our stance should be predicated on a present reality, but part of the debate is what is the present reality. Now, obviously it's a mixed bag. I mean, the truth of the matter is the Jewish people living in the state of Israel have benefited in many, 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 many good and constructive ways. An infrastructure for Torah and religion, and just as a refuge for Jewish people from all over the world is a truly wonderful thing. On the other hand, as you know, we still have different conflicts between the government and religion that are still going on, the controversies about the army. So people will look at it as a mixed bag. They will go in different ways. I will point out one interesting point, though. Rav Kook, who, of course, died before there was a state of Israel. Rav Kook, so people say he was chief rabbi of Israel. Not true. There was no state called the State of Israel, but he was chief rabbi of Palestine. He died in the 1930s when Eretz Yisrael was under the British mandate. But Rav Kook was very involved in Zionism and in the attempts to create a state of... Actually, it wasn't clear what the name would be. So, the fact that this is called State of Israel, that was not a done deal. There were other names that were considered, the land of Yehuda, whatever it would be. But Rav Kook was involved in issues of statehood, and when Rav Kook was asked, how can you endorse the concept of a state if so many of these leaders are not religious or even anti-religious, Rav Kook answered, that is the nature of Messianic redemption. Messianic redemption will often come from tainted and flawed origins because that is the way of God bringing everybody back. Meaning, Rav Kook made the point, righteous people come to Eretz Yisrael because of their relationship with Hashem. But some people will come to Hashem through their relationship to Eretz Yisrael. Meaning, they'll get involved in Zionism, they'll get involved in nationalism, they'll get involved in communism, whatever it is, and they think that's what's pushing them. In reality, it is their neshama yearning to be close to God. So Rav Kook actually saw this as a positive idea, that Hashem was creating a mechanism for every type of Jew to draw near to him by building up the land. And he said that's the nature of Messianic redemption. So according to Rav Kook, it was almost a maila rather than a chisaron that the founders of the state were not religious. He also made an interesting point that, in English we have an expression, a wolf in sheep's clothing. That means something bad that's dressed up as something good. But Rav Kook said in Kabbalah, there's sometimes an idea, he didn't use these exact words, of a sheep that's dressed in wolf's clothing. Sometimes a powerful, good idea must enter the world in the guise of impropriety, because otherwise the forces of impurity won't let it in. And therefore, he said, the concept of rebuilding Eretz Yisrael was such a powerful idea that had it come only from the religious side of things, it would have been shot down, it would have been destroyed. We have to kind of fool the radar of the Kochot of Tumah, fool the Sitra Achra by making it look like something negative, when in fact it's positive. In fact, Rav Kook, this is actually one of Rav Kook's most controversial ideas. It applies to a lot of things. It applies to feminism. I don't want to be marich in all of the pratim, meaning there's a lot that is totally destructive about feminism, all of these calls for egalitarianism. For sure, it's treif. But in its root, there is something valuable in the fact that women should be treated with equal dignity and respect. So sometimes a valuable idea will enter the world encrusted with all sorts of deviance and all sorts of degradation, because that's how it gets in. That's how you fool the Yetzer Hara. And then our job is the very difficult job of how to extract the good from the bad and how to differentiate. Okay, it's actually a fairly revolutionary idea in which some of the excesses and even degradations of modern life have at their core a certain positivity that needs to be extracted. I'm going to get in real trouble now. The example that comes to mind, I really shouldn't say it, but I want to say it. There was a rabbi in England who got in big, huge trouble. And I might get in huge trouble for saying this. But the truth of the matter is, there is a core of truth in what he said. He was talking about the shanda, the cherpa, the busha, so I'm going to use strong words, about gay marriage and all of that stuff and how it's a perversion, and of course it is. But here is what he said. He said, within all of that junk and perversity, there was a core of light in which men should be free to feel, have feelings, have emotions, show love, and show affection. Now, you understand that this can blow up in your face at any moment, can blow up in my face at any moment. So let me be unequivocal and let me just state the obvious, pashut, unvarnished truth. Obviously, homosexual relations in the Torah are an isur d'oraisa. They are a chiyuv skila. They are called a tayeva. They are called an abomination. And it is an evil that has to be opposed, for sure. But one of the problems that men have, is that they're not able to show emotion. They're not able to have deep friendships. This is a well-known problem. You know, only women have friends. Men don't have friends. Again, at your age, you probably still have friends, but as you get older, you don't have friends anymore. And what you can learn even from the rishus of gay is the notion of creating friendship and chibur. Now, the rabbi in England got in tremendous trouble. He was 1 inch away of losing his smicha, losing his job, and I think the agreement was that every single drasha he'll ever give from that day forward has to be approved by 3 other rabbis. I hope I don't get that particular sanction. But I'm bringing this up simply to underscore Rav Kook's point, which you can understand is a very controversial point, and that is, sometimes within evil, there is a nakuda of good that we have to extract. And of course, this is the basis, the idea of Kabbalah, of there are sparks of light that you gather from the broken kalim. Right? There's shaviras ha-kalim, and you gather nitzitzis, and this would be an example. So this is a very roundabout way to go back to your point that sometimes a tainted origin might in fact lead to something very, very good. Yeah?
So one of the unique things about Halacha, unlike other legal systems, is that when something is established as precedent and becomes tradition, it cannot be repealed, which is why we still keep 2 days of Yom Tov, for example, and why flasks of liquid need to be covered to prevent the snakes from poisoning it. On the Sanhedrin, which proved that it could still operate for centuries after the destruction of the Second Temple. Could it be that Hashem chose to ultimately disband the Sanhedrin in order to prevent an oversaturation of Halacha, that maybe past a certain point having too much? Halacha could be an unnecessary hindrance.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting argument. Again, let me repeat a little bit or summarize a little bit. Basically, we know the basic approach to Halacha is once the Sanhedrin of 71 has decided certain things, we're kind of bound by it, even if conditions change and even if the reasons seem not to apply today. But until we have a Sanhedrin that can repeal and overrule, we're kind of stuck, if that's the right word, to the system. And the 2 examples you gave, well, one example is clear, one example is controversial. The clear example is Yom Tov Sheni. Right? The obligation of keeping 2 days Yom Tov was because of calendrical uncertainty when Rosh Chodesh was. And even though now we have a calendar, we still have to keep it because lest we go back to the base, not less, but we go back to the base of Mikdash, we'll go back to the old system. The problem is, if we go back to the base of Mikdash, we're not going to go back to the old system. We will have instantaneous communication. We're not going to have Pony Express. I mean, if the base of Mikdash, Be'ezras Hashem, would be rebuilt tomorrow, the Gemara was assuming, if the base of Mikdash comes back tomorrow, we're going to go back to Pony Express, and then we'll be in doubt again. Well, no. If the base of Mikdash gets rebuilt tomorrow, we'll be able to be Mefarsem, Rosh Chodesh, immediately. So the logic of Yom Tov Sheni, Bisman Hazeh, there is no intrinsic logic to Yom Tov Sheni. So why do I keep Yom Tov Sheni? The answer is, hey, you're stuck. The Sanhedrin made such a takana. We have to keep it until we have a Sanhedrin that might reconsider whether Yom Tov Sheni is necessary. Right? You're kind of stuck by the action of a Sanhedrin. It's like a law. Until the law is repealed, the law is on the books. Now, the second example you gave is actually a machlokas. The Mishnah in Maseches Trumos mentions a rule that any liquids that were left uncovered without supervision, you're not allowed to drink, because there was a chashash that maybe a snake, when you weren't looking, a snake came and drank from it and put in some venom that you can't detect. It would be poisonous, you would die, and therefore the liquid must be spilled out. So many poskim say, Bisman Hazeh, we don't really have, in most places at least, we don't really have snakes doing this stuff. So some do matter it, but you are correct that the Vilna Gaon says, once Chazal made a takana, that's it. Who cares about the reason? So you're suggesting an interesting thing, that if we are in fact, I hate to use the word stuck, but if we're stuck by the accumulation of all of these gezeros, even if the reasons don't apply anymore, so maybe that was the hashgacha pratis that led to a galus and a churban and an abolishment of the Sanhedrin, because if we kept on having the Sanhedrin, we'd keep on getting more and more and more and more and more and more, and we would result in what's called an oversaturation of halacha. So maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to arrest the process. Again, I don't know. I do not deny that that's a possibility. I will tell you that I know Rav Gottlieb used it in an opposite way. He said that Hashem wanted to stop a Sanhedrin from abrogating, meaning the following. Let's take Yom Tov Sheni as a reason. If there would be a Sanhedrin, it's very possible. I don't want to say for sure, I can't speak for the Sanhedrin, but it would be very possible that they would say there's no reason to keep 2 days of Yom Tov in Chutz La'aretz anymore. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu has spiritual reasons that go beyond the legal reasons. So maybe the Sanhedrin was abolished so that the gezeros would be kept rather than repealed, right? You're giving the reason, let's abolish the Sanhedrin so we shouldn't have more gezeros. Rav Gottlieb actually suggested that maybe the idea is that we shouldn't get rid of the things that we already have, because spiritually, Chutz La'aretz needs 2 days of Yom Tov, meaning even if the stated reason doesn't apply, but in Ruchnius, we need it. So I guess the only thing I can tell you is that it's very, very clear that if in a given time and in a given place we don't have the mechanisms to change the halachic system, there are reasons for that. That is part of hashgacha pratis. But to then try to identify the specific reason, that may be a little beyond us. Yeah.
Are there any foods that are less treif than other foods? Like, let's say, non-kosher cheese and milk versus shrimp and oysters, or lobster? So the truth of the matter is, on one hand, of course, treif is treif, and when something is treif, not allowed to eat it. But there are levels of severity. So, for example, eating chazer, eating pork, is worse than eating beef that has not been shechted, like you buy a steak from a non-kosher store, because at least a cow is a kosher animal, even though it wasn't shechted. In fact, they basically say, Rabbi Sosalanter, unfortunately, one of the greatest of the tzaddikim, unfortunately had a son who went off the derech. He actually became a very, very famous professor of mathematics, but at least for a while he was not religious. And Rabbi Sosalanter wrote him a letter. He begged him that when you eat non-kosher beef and chicken rather than pork. So there is indeed a hierarchy, and that hierarchy is primarily in terms of how it affects your spiritual essence, because non-kosher food creates blemishes in the soul, and the blemishes may vary in severity based on the hierarchy. Now, when you talk about something like non-kosher cheese, so there it may depend. There it may only be rabbinic prohibitions, meaning I'm suggesting that even under Torah law, there are hierarchies, and kal v'chomer, if something is only an isur d'Rabbanan, it's not going to be of the same severity. So the bottom line of that is the following. This is an interesting point, that even if a person is not ready to be kosher 100%, you can still advise a person to take certain steps. I mean, I'll give you another example. What if I'm willing to buy kosher food, but I don't want to kosher my kitchen, so I'm still going to use the pots and the pans and the spoons and the plates, all of which absorb non-kosher food. Halachically, that's prohibited, for sure, but there's absolutely no question that it is not of the same severity as actually eating the non-kosher food, right? So as a result, it's totally appropriate to, if you're trying to be Maariv somebody, to try to negotiate different types of compromises in which it's not 100%, but it's better than zero. And that's important in Judaism generally. You know, people sometimes think if they can't do the whole thing, then why bother? Voltaire once said that we allow the best to be the enemy of the better, meaning we don't do things better because we can't do it best. Not emes. Rav Weinbach, Zatzal, our own founding Rosh Hashiva, once said it in a very cute way. He said, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Think about that, right? I know you heard from your mothers growing up, anything worth doing is worth doing well. That's the standard saying. But Rav Weinbach turned it around. Anything, if it's worth doing, do it even if you're going to do it poorly, even if it's only going to be a half job. Because it's still better than nothing. If it's worth doing, do it even poorly. So I think with kashrus you'd apply it. Kashrus, Shabbos, same thing. Shabbos, you're not ready to keep Shabbos. Friday night, you're going to go to the movies. Okay, but make Kiddush before you go to the movies. You're going to say, my Kiddush is worthless because I'm going to the movies? No, going to the movies is wrong. Maybe wrong all the time, but certainly Friday night, let's say it's wrong. Okay, but so what? Kiddush is still right? So make Kiddush and go to the movies is better than not making Kiddush and going to the movies. So I think overall that's kind of where your question is taking us, and that's where you should go with it. Yeah.
If we believe wholeheartedly that Kiddush cards the right path, are we still entitled to believe that there's some level of MS to perhaps other religions?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just having trouble hearing. In other words, we believe that Judaism is true. Can we accept that there's truth in other religions? Is that?
Well.
Yeah. So here's another English rabbi. I guess English rabbis are the subject tonight, who got in big trouble. This is actually a very well-known rabbi, the former chief rabbi of England, who was nifter 2 years ago, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha. And perhaps you've read stuff from him. And he actually made exactly this point, that there may be aspects of truth in all religions. He got in very, very big trouble for that. But the truth of the matter is, it is 100% true. Now, once again, it goes back to the earlier discussions, that sometimes within many, many shekers, many, many lies, many distortions, many untruths, there may be kernels of light that are emes. They're like trapped kernels. And in fact, the Gemara itself says, no sheker can be matzliach in the world unless it contains some aspect of truth. The Gemara itself says that. All sheker has to have some emes in it, because if it has no emes in it, nobody's going to accept it at all. So, once again, and I can even go back to the Rambam. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Melachim, and this is fascinating because this was censored out of the Rambam by the Catholic Church, even though in some ways it's pro-Christianity. remember the Rambam sheet, we talked about this a lot of times over the years, that the Rambam differentiates between Christianity and Islam. The Rambam maintains that because Islam is a monotheistic religion that does not believe in any type of idol, so Islam is not avodah zarah, even though it's distortion. And the Rambam maintains, therefore, that a ben Noach, a goy, who adheres to Islam, is not in violation of the Noachite laws, because he's not an oved avodah zarah. But the Rambam's position was that Christianity, which in his time meant Catholicism, was considered to be avodah zarah, both because of the Trinity aspect, in which God had a body, and because of the multiplicity aspect, meaning there are two different reasons why the Rambam maintained that Christianity was avodah zarah, because it gave divinity a body, and it also created a multiplicity in the sense of the Trinity. So the Rambam maintains, therefore, a non-Jew that is a Christian is a violator of the Noachide laws. Now, Rabbeinu Tam, who lived in France, lived in Catholic France, actually is cholek, and he said that although Christianity is a false belief, it is not an idolatrous belief. And a Noachite who professes Christianity is not in violation of avodah zarah. That's a huge machlokas about the status of Christianity and the like. And also there's a shaila what Rabbeinu Tam means by that. Okay. Now, let's go back to the Rambam. Right after the Rambam says Christianity is avodah zarah, which is a pretty harsh judgment, he then says the following. He says that both the growth of Christianity and Islam were part of God's divine plan to wean the world away from paganism towards an eventual belief in one God, and to link belief in one God with morality and ethics. And therefore, even the part that's avodah zarah, he saw as weaning people away from a greater sheker, meaning the avodah zarah of Christianity is far better than the avodah zarah of Greeks and Romans, which was mamish paganism and the like. So I think from the Rambam himself, you see the idea that there are kernels of truth that were part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's divine plan to bring the world eventually over to the belief in one God. And I should also add, to link it to morality. See, this is an interesting point that we sometimes don't pay attention to. Every religion in the world, except maybe Satan worship, and even Satan worship, will at least assert verbally, even if they don't live that way, that religion and morality are connected. In other words, every religion will say, I don't mean do, but say. They'll say that to be a religious person also means you're moral, you're ethical, you don't cheat, you don't steal, right? So religion and ethics are totally connected. But one doesn't realize that was not a self-evident proposition. In the ancient world, if you talk about, let's say, Greek and Roman religion, religion and ethics had nothing to do with each other. Now, I'm not saying there weren't any Greeks that may not have been good people. There probably were. I mean, not every Greek, stabbed everybody. But it had nothing to do with religion. If you study Greek religion, not that it's Kedai, the Greek gods were totally immoral people. They raped, they murdered, they dismembered, they molested children and animals. They stole. Morality had nothing to do with it. Meaning, you believed in those gods, and maybe you were moral, but it was not because you believed in the gods that you were moral. Zeus did not care. Zeus was a total mushkas in every way. Every single one of the Greek gods was just abhorrent behavior. I mean, they would have, gone to, wherever you imprison these figures. Now, the Chiddush that said that God requires ethical behavior, morality, came from the Torah. So the Chiddush of the Torah is not just monotheism, it is what is called ethical monotheism. And once that took root, it became the basis of every religion in the world. that whoever God is, he cares about ethics. And this is what the Rambam is telling us, that Christianity and Islam, and even though the Rambam takes the position that Christianity is idolatry, were a way to bring the world to a higher ethical consciousness, at least in theory. Not in practice. Christians did plenty of bad stuff, but in theory, a higher ethical consciousness that would pave the way for Geula. So, once again, I think that idea that there is going to be truths there. That's right. Again, Rabbi Sachs got in trouble for being maybe too explicit about it and maybe giving people the wrong impression. But just as the other British rabbi who even got in bigger trouble, you sometimes have to go behind the facade and identify some fundamental truth in what they're saying. And I think that is the case. Yeah?
If that is, if we somehow got enough Gedolim and Rosh Yeshivas and rabbis on board, would it technically be possible to reinstitute the Sanhedrin?
I'm sorry, start again, first half?
If we somehow got enough Gedolim on board, would it...
Oh, okay, yeah, very good question. If we had enough Gedolim on board, however you define Gedolim, that would be a problem. Could we reinstitute the Sanhedrin? So, here is the story. Let's ask as a technical matter. Why can't we just make a Sanhedrin? Is it only because we don't have agreement? Well, there is a halachic impediment to creating a Sanhedrin, and that is, in order to have a Sanhedrin, the members have to have semicha, ordination. So you'll say, well, so what? Everybody has semicha. Well, no. I hate to say it. We are all fakers. All of us rabbis are a bunch of fakers. None of us have semicha. And the reason is, real semicha is an unbroken chain from Moshe Rabbeinu until the present moment, in which Moshe ordained 70 elders. The 70 elders ordained other people. Samuch achar samuch. And that's how you have a Sanhedrin. And what happened was, at some time during the Roman persecutions, the last person who had smicha was killed before he was able to ordain other people. By the way, this is the difference why Tanoim are called Rabbi Akiva. Amoraim are usually called Rav somebody. Rabbi indicates actual smicha. Rav, like we would even say today, Rav is a title of honor, but it does not indicate actual smicha. And that is why the some Amoraim of Eretz Yisrael, even after the Mishnah, were still called Rabbi because smicha was given in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, right, etc. So, without smicha, we can't have a Sanhedrin. Now, you may ask me, so how are we ever going to get a Sanhedrin? Answer, Eliyahu Hanavi will come before Mashiach. Eliyahu Hanavi has smicha, so he will be able to ordain the people who are deserving of it. Who knows who's going to be deserving, but Eliyahu Hanavi will ordain enough people to create a Sanhedrin. Now, here's a fascinating part of Jewish history. Rav Yosef Karo was the Rav of Tzfat in the 1500s. Rav Yosef Karo's Rebbe was Rav Yaakov Bey Rav. That's Rav Yosef Karo's Rebbe. Rav Yaakov Bey Rav was convinced, based on a passage of the Rambam, that if most of the Chachamim of Klal Yisrael, or maybe all, either all or most of the Chachamim of Klal Yisrael, would agree to create smicha, they could create it yesh me'ayin, without a necessity of an unbroken chain. It's based on the lashon of the Rambam. So Maariv Bey Rav, Rav Yaakov Bey Rav, wanted to be Machadesh Smicha. Why did he want to be Machadesh Smicha? Because he held that you need a Sanhedrin in order to bring Mashiach. So he felt that this would be a way of bringing Mashiach. So he actually ordained 4 Talmidim. He actually gave real Smicha, as he based on his Shita, to 4 Talmidim. Among them was Rav Yosef Karo. So Rav Yosef Karo actually, earned the title. Rav Yosef Karo earned Smicha, the Alshich, Rav Moshe Galante, the Mabit, a few Talmidim. But this created an enormous controversy, as you would expect, because the Chachmei Tzvat held there could be a legitimacy in what's called chidush hasmicha. The Chachmei Yerushalayim, Maariv ben Lev, took the position that this couldn't be done. So as a result, there was a huge machlokes regarding the legitimacy of smicha, so it never carried over to the next generation. Meaning that first group got smicha. I think there may have been a second group, but it never went beyond that second group. But that does mean the theoretical possibility of that shita would exist, but it would be totally on this huge machlokas between the Chachmei Tzvat, Maariv Beirav, and Maariv ben Leb, as to whether this is shaykh. So you can look up Chidush HaSmicha. You can even Google probably renewal of smicha, and you could see the different makoros on this particular problem. Yeah.
What's the neshama if someone says they're Jewish?
I'm sorry.
What's the neshama if someone says they're Jewish? What's the neshama?
Yeah, nemanis, right. Some guy comes in off the street and says that I'm Jewish. Can I just accept that? A guy walks into shul, right? I don't know what he is. Now, maybe in Eretz Yisrael, you have a svara, most people are Jewish, etc. But in Chutz La'aretz, the middle of, right, some guy walks in off the street and says, I'm Jewish. Mehechi Teisi, you can count him for a minyan, or you can give him an aliyah, or you can marry his daughter. Does a person have neshama? So this is an interesting issue. Historically, there was a svara that a person did have neshama to say he was a Jew, simply because being a Jew was so hard and so difficult that nobody's going to claim to be a Jew unless they really are. Some people have questioned today. Although still being a Jew has a lot of disadvantages, particularly with rising anti-Semitism. On the other hand, being a Jew is a pretty good deal in Israel. You get automatic citizenship, the law of return, whatever it would be. So some poskim have raised the issue that you need a little bit more substantiation. You no longer have the umdina. But I have to tell you the truth, in a way, the way it works practically is kind of a joke, really. The way let's say the rabbinate system. You want to come to Israel, right? So in order to make aliyah, you have to submit proof that you're Jewish. So what is the proof that you're Jewish? That a rabbi has to write a letter that he knows that you're Jewish. Okay. How does the rabbi know that you're Jewish? Because you told him. So, I mean, I do this a million times. Somebody wants me to write a letter to the Jewish. Says, well, are you Jewish? Says, yeah, I'm Jewish. So I write a letter. Now, if you're telling me that what he says is not good enough, then why is what I say any better if what I say is only based on what he told me? So in many, many ways, it's kind of a circular type of verification. But me'ikar adin, as I say, the poskim still say that bisman hazeh, a person is naman to define his yichus, simply because a person wouldn't lie about it, because it's not kedai. There are still too many disadvantages to being Jewish that we assume the person is telling the truth. However, let me point out that because of things like Reform conversion and patrilineal descent, the Reform movement believes so you do have to go further. You do have to say, well, when you say you're Jewish, were you born from a Jewish mother? Was there a conversion? Because those things you still have to check, because the guy may think he's Jewish. The guy may be. Now, the issue is not that he's lying, but based on the information, he's drawing the wrong conclusions from the information. So that you're mechuyev to be bodek on for sure. Yeah.
So let's examine a case of a firm from birth person who never had to struggle to keep Shabbat, but keep Shabbat in totality, versus someone who did not grow up with and who never struggled to give up Halacha, such as using the phone, electric lights, etc. But yet the one thing that was too difficult for them to give up was to give up driving to family. Since unlike the FFB, this person's family members are far away from each other and they rotate hosting Shabbat, and this person just won't give up being away from family on Shabbat. Who is judged more favorably? On one hand, one gets schar for the more struggle one overcomes for resisting a mitzvah lo aseh. So the reluctant desecrator still gets a lot of schar, while the firm person gets much less. Yet, on the other hand, at the end of the day, one person keeps Shabbat, and the other one doesn't, which is Chayiv Misa.
Yeah.
Or Chayiv Taras, yeah. So
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
the territory?
No, that's a very excellent question. Again, the idea was one person struggles to keep Shabbat and makes a lot of sacrifices, but there are some areas in which it's too difficult for them, such as visiting family, and they keep everything else with a great deal of struggle. Another person is an FFB in which keeping Shabbat is relatively smooth sailing, but he's able to keep Shabbat and he's not compromising in anything. So on one hand, one person is keeping Shabbat at 100% level, and the other is 85%. On the other hand, is 85% is with struggle and self-sacrifice. So so in terms of which person does Hashem look at with greater esteem and the like? You know, again, I can't speak for Hashem. All I can tell you is HaKadosh Baruch Hu factors everything into account, meaning to say, yes, the guy who didn't keep Shabbos completely has Averos of not keeping Shabbos completely, but Hashem factors in the difficulty and the sacrifice, as well as giving a premium for the mitzvos that he does keep. So how that adds, how you compare sacrificing to keep a partial Shabbat versus not sacrificing and keeping a whole Shabbat, that's a difficult calculation, but rest assured that HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes everything into account. I think I mentioned to you, forgive me, well, I've been doing Q&A for 10 years, so obviously I repeat a lot of things, so I'm not sure if I told the story recently. But I remember many years ago in the 1980s, I used to be involved as a teacher with NCSY. I was already married then, so I didn't get involved in, more of the controversial issues of, boys and girls together. But I worked with NCSY, and if you've ever been involved in NCSY, which in many ways is a phenomenal organization, so Motzei Shabbos, they have a kumsitz. And it's very dramatic, the lights are out, it's dark. And it was like true confession time. Like the boys or girls would get up and they would tell their stories. And often it would bring tears to your eyes about how much they sacrificed to be able to serve Hashem. So there was a girl that got up. She was probably 14 years old, maybe, 10th grade or whatever it is. And she told a story that not only are her parents not religious, but they are absolutely opposed to her ever keeping Shabbos. They don't want her to keep Shabbos. And she had to somehow find a way to even come to this Shabbaton. And she says what she does is this. 11 o'clock at night, Friday night, after her parents are asleep, she goes into the bathroom and she takes out her hidden Shabbos candles. And she lights her Shabbos candles in the bathroom. And then she blows them out and puts them back in and turns on the fan so there won't be any smell of smoke. And that's how she does Shabbos candles every week. Now, you could give us, you could test a person for smicha and ask him, how many averos were committed in this hypothetical, right? How many things did this girl do wrong, right? Besides many malachos, making a bracha in the bathroom, everything is wrong about this picture. And yet, look at how much she wanted to try to serve Hashem to the best of her ability. Is it so pashut that what she did is just so bad that it doesn't mean anything? Is that pashut? Or is there an additional way of looking at it? She's a kid. She's living at home. She can't make her own decisions. She's under the rule of her parents. Her parents are not letting her do any of this. So she's struggling. She's trying. Do you think HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not machshav that? Again, I can't speak for God. But I think there is something in Shemayim, even for that, under those circumstances. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at the total picture of things. And that's where your question will come in. Yeah.
For someone that doesn't have a lot of time in learning and they just have maybe a few minutes or hours a day, how should they divide up their learning and what should they prioritize?
Yeah, so this is a very important question. Once you're not in a full-time learning situation, you're working or whatever, even going to school, so the question becomes, I don't have a lot of time to learn. What is it that I should learn? So there are two answers actually that are commonly given. It's not clear which is the halachic answer. Answer number one is, interestingly enough, Shnaya Mikra V'Hecha Targum.
the idea of taking the parsha of the week and, Shnaya Mikra, reading the pasuk twice with either Targum Onkelos, or I would actually say the Art Scroll translation is good also, because the purpose is to understand it. And that way you're learning the parsha of the week, because that is the only part of Torah that is specifically mentioned as a chiyuv for a person to learn. So that would have kedima, actually, over everything. The second answer that's given is the rule of mashal libo chafetz, right? This is an important rule in Torah, that one should emphasize in their learning that which their heart desires. Because when you have enthusiasm, when you have pleasure, when you have enjoyment, somehow you will manage to find more time than you thought you had. So there's a machlokes. Do I just go with Shnaya Mikra, or do I apply the rule of mashal libo chafetz? But be it as it may, if you can do both, that's wonderful. But mashal libo chafetz is really, really important, because without enthusiasm, there's not going to be continuity. Meaning, you start learning something you really don't like, you're going to drop it. So mashal libo chafetz is a big yesod. Of course, everyone remembers the famous quip attributed to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. A person asked Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, I only have a half an hour a day to learn. Should I learn Musar or should I learn Gemara? So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, for sure learn Musar, because if you learn Musar, you'll see you have more than a half an hour a day to learn. You think you have half an hour a day to learn. Musar will teach you have more time than you think. So that's also something to think about as well. Yeah.
Early on you said you applied Reb Cook's theory that sometimes good things have to come in
bad packages.
They come down. So he was saying it by what he thought was a good idea, right? The state of Israel, whatever it was. Sometimes if I have more, let's say you have something, I'm trying to think of a marshal, whatever the marshal is, but sometimes they have good ideas which don't come with a bad club. There's no Sitra Akka trying to stop it. Let's say the Yeshiva system, which Chaim Belazar started, they didn't need a club. For some instance. Now, feminism, let's say you have someone who wants gay rights. The gains that you have from that is so minimalistic to the hashkasa which is going on. The Mabel pashtas came from the gay rights. So whatever the point is, it's so minimalistic what's going to come out of there. So there's better friendships. Is there statistical observation that the relationships in men improved after this? No.
Well,
it's not so minimalistic. Someone can up and say that neo-Nazism has certain manners because it made Jews realize that they're always going to have to remain Jews.
Well. I tell you. Okay. So it depends how you define it. Meaning, I'm not going to say, or nobody's going to say, Nazism was good for the Jews. But the idea that the Seinei Yisrael can be ma'oreres teshuva is an idea that Chazal themselves say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be maimed melech kasher in order to be machzeres lemutav. So there are certain blessings in anti-Semitism, meaning anti-Semitism can teach Jewish people things about Yidden. But okay, I'm asking to you that the specific example of gay rights was just the example that person used, but the yesod that good ideas can be nislabesh in a chitzonius of sheker is, I think, a valid idea. The Ger Rebbe said what? The Ger Rebbe said that we were robbed of a number of things. He says, we were robbed of Zionism by the Zionists, and we were robbed of tshuva by the Balei Tshuva. Meaning to say, Zionism in the sense of love of Eretz Yisrael should belong to everybody. But then it becomes identified with, Zionism. Tshuva. We think tshuva, tshuva is for Balei Tshuva. You guys who aren't from. I'm from, I don't need to do tshuva. Tshuva belongs to everybody. I would also add Tanakh, right? Tanakh was robbed. The Maskilim took over Tanakh, right? So from people don't learn Nach anymore because the Maskilim took it over. So there are things that are good, that are nislabesh in something bad, and as a result, Klal Yisrael loses their kesher to it. But yeah, you're right for sure that in all cases, if the psailes is so meruba, it's so excessive as compared to the nitzas of Ohr, the only logical thing is to try to avoid it because listen, poison has nutrients too. Probably, I don't know. Arsenic probably has some vitamins in it. I don't know. But you're not going to say take arsenic because it gives you 150% of your vitamin C for the day. So, I'm asking you. I think that's a good point. But Rav Kook is saying that once the phenomenon is here, you try to be baidik and see what can I take from it. It's a mitzvah, so then you try to learn from it. Yeah.
So we were talking about how some takanot stay and some of them are deemed irrelevant. Like, what is the process that deems that we still have 2 days of Yom Tov, but certain things we say the situations are no longer relevant, clapping hands on Shabbat, or like what we were talking about, the liquid, how davening going. One we said the reason no longer applies, so we still keep it. The other one we said the reason no longer applies, so we should do away with it.
Yeah, this is actually a very, very huge topic in Halacha, because we seem to, as you learn Halacha more and more, you encounter two opposite svaras that move in the opposite direction. Sometimes we say, even if the reason doesn't apply, the halacha is the halacha does not change, and the halacha becomes independent of the reason. And then sometimes you say, we don't do this today because this was because of a certain reason, and the reason doesn't apply today. And we say both svaras. Some halachas we say, halacha is halacha, doesn't change. Other times we say, well, it's because of a given situation. So the poskim down on this. The poskim wonder, how come sometimes we have this svara in the Gemara itself, and sometimes we have that svara. So there are mamish svarim written trying to come up with klalim on this. The basic approach is one that's actually very, very hard to historically verify, and that is, it actually depends on the lashon of the takana that the Sanhedrin promulgated, meaning to say, if the takana was specifically tied to the reason, then there is a cheshbein that if the reason doesn't apply, the takana doesn't apply. And if the takana was not explicitly linked to the reason, even if the reason generated the takana, it becomes a freestanding rule that remains. Now, the problem with that is, that's not a useful tool in psak, simply because we don't have a transcript. I mean, Chazal will say the Chachamim were guys or something, fine, but we don't have a verbatim declaration of what the actual words of the takana were, so how can you figure this out in one way or the other? So the truth of the matter is, the only way the poskim do it is by trying to bring rayas, meaning if we find in the Gemara, in other words, it's reverse engineering, meaning if you find in the Gemara that a takana doesn't apply because the reason doesn't apply, memela you're medayek that Chazal knew that was the lashon of the takana. Meaning you can only do it by reverse engineering. You can't automatically know except with the proofs that you have. But it is a very, very good question. Okay, yeah.
At what point did minhagei Klal Yisrael, when Kippah or davening Maariv, how did that get adapted into halacha?
In other words, you're asking specifically about Maariv, where it's machlokas in the Gemara, but we paskin that davening Maariv Shmona Esrei, not Kriya Shema, is Rishus, was originally an optional thing because there were no korbanos at night. But now we say it's become a chova because it was a minhag that was accepted, and that now you have to daven Maariv, right? So don't use this as an excuse, because it's become a chova. So you're asking me, at what point did these things happen? Again, it's hard to know. I can tell you that a reference to the notion of kiblu aleim chova is already in the time of the Gaonim. So in the time of the Amoraim, it may still have been fluid. But by the time of the Gaonim already, which is right after, relatively after the Gemara, it seems to have been accepted. So I would say that the Gaonim did a lot of standardization of minhagei tefillah, whether it was the siddur of Rav Sadia Gaon and later the siddur of Rav Amram Gaon. That essentially set the basic structure of tefillos, and that kind of recognized the minhagim that were already considered to be binding on Klal Yisrael. So it was early. It was before the Rishonim. Yeah.
Could I say that someone who doesn't believe in tzchal v'onesh
Yeah. So here's the question. If a person does not believe in reward and punishments, but he keeps mitzvos, that's what you're talking about? He says, I keep mitzvos because God commanded.
Let's say he's not necessarily religious, but he does a kind deed because he's moved by his heart.
Okay. So you could even ask about an atheist. In other words, what is the status? Okay, what is the status of a person who does good things? He does good things. He's charitable. He helps people. Nice person, but either he doesn't believe in Hashem, or he doesn't believe in Torah min hashamayim, or he doesn't believe in reward and punishment. But lamaisa, he does good things. Does such a person get rewarded by Hashem for the good that he's done? Now, you can't say, there's no such thing as a good atheist. I mean, lamaisa, okay. It may be under stress, without Hashem, the morality breaks down. That might be true. But lamaisa, in terms of their actual lives, there are people who don't believe in Hashem who do good things in the world. Or somebody cures cancer, whatever it would be. So here's the thing you need to say. According to the Rambam basically takes the position that if one is not maimin in the Ikrei Amunah, which includes Charvi Onesh and includes Metzias Hashem, then by definition, they cannot have a chelik in Olam Haba because the admission ticket for Olam Haba is Emunah in the fundamentals. The Rambam puts a very, very important chashivas on Emunah in Ikrei, on belief in the Ikrei Emunah. So the question you'll ask is, so how will this guy get rewarded? Meaning, are you simply telling me the apikaris who cures cancer, or whatever, who saves, 1 million people, or whatever it is, gets no reward? So the Rambam will have to learn he gets reward in Olam Hazeh. Hashem will give him osher v'chavot and the like. Now that's the Rambam sheet. But the emes is that Tferes Yisrael, that's the commentary on the Mishnah, 19th century Gadol in Germany, actually may even be based on earlier Rishonim, actually takes the position that for sure Hashem will reward the good that a person does, even if he's a kaifer in Ikrei Amunah, and there'll be some type of Olam Haba. It may not be the spiritual Olam Haba of that close connection to God, but there's some type of quasi Olam Haba for that person as well. Now, I would be mechalek, within the Tferes Yisrael, I would be mechalek between Bein Adam L'Chaveiro and Bein Adam L'Makayim. That is, if a guy doesn't believe in God, but he puts on tefillin because Chabad, somebody stopped him and put on tefillin, it's not clear that pula has any chashivas if you're not doing it as Avodas Hashem. So a mitzvah Bein Adam L'Makayim seems to have validity only if you're doing it to serve Hashem. But the Tferes Yisrael might be saying, because those are his examples, when it comes to Bein Adam L'Chaveiro, tzedakah, chesed, compassion, rachamim, that is intrinsically good, even when it's not linked to Avodas Hashem. So although the Rambam would say it's not shaykh for that guy to get Olam Haba, Tferes Yisrael says there will be some type of eternal schar for that. But all I'm saying is that even that liberal shita would not say it by Bein Adam L'Makayim. In fact, this was one of Rav Shach Dainas. I know our Chabad friends I'll get some mail on this, but I just want to say it b'kitzur. I don't want to be marich polemically on it. Chabad has a tefillin campaign, right? And they stop you, are you Jewish? Put on tefillin. And, sometimes a person becomes makorev, but sometimes just like one time in his life, and Chabad makes the argument that since there's a special Gehenim for somebody who never wore tefillin, even one time is good. So Rav Shach's taina on that practice was that if a person who doesn't believe in Hashem puts on tefillin, it doesn't count for anything. And therefore, you haven't accomplished anything because the person doesn't believe in God. Okay, so first of all, some people do believe in God, but let's take it. So that was Rav Shach's taina. Now, I think part of the Chabad response was, it's not worse than chinuch, meaning even if it's not a kiyum mitzvah, But the same way you train a kid who's not bar mitzvah to do mitzvah, so this is a way of training somebody. In other words, even if it's not a mitzvah, there may be a chinuch in the mitzvah. Okay, beseder. But that's why I would say, though, that the Tiferes Yisrael's nekuda, that even a kaifer can get sechar, nitzchi, in Olam Haba, would be la'aniyas taiti, only bein adam la chaveiro, not necessarily bein adam la makam. I mean, the example would be, a guy doesn't go to work on Shabbos simply because he's taking Saturday off. Well, technically, even if he didn't do malacha on Shabbos, it's hard to hear that somehow he would get rewarded for not working on Shabbos if the reason he's not working on Shabbos is simply because he's taking a vacation that day, right? So that would be the answer there. But like the Rambam, the Chayre, there is no avenue for Olam Haba, for a person that's a kaifer in Ikrei Emunah. Yeah.
What about someone that is from religious Jew, but he denies one of the agreement? He denies Gehenna, or
Yeah. So this gets us into a huge machlokas, as you know, and probably, and as I've said before, the Rambam counts 13 Ikrei Emunah. Rav Yosef Albo in the Sefer Huikarim, who was a philosopher 2 generations after the Rambam, says there's only 3 Ikrei Emunah, and Rav Albo's 3 Ikrei Emunah are Metzias Hashem, that there's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, number 1. Number 2, there is some type of reward and punishment system, number 2. And number 3, Hashem revealed his Ratzon by Torah min Hashemayim. Now, a difference, let me give you a practical difference between Rav Albo and the Rambam. Let's say a person believes that there's some reward and punishment system, but it's not going to be Gehenna, or it's not going to be Tchiyas HaMesim, or whatever it would be. According to the Rambam, that person might be an apikoros. According to Rav Albo, that person may be mistaken, but as long as he believes there's some reward and punishment system, that would be okay. In fact, even if you deny Mashiach, if a person denied Bias HaMashiach, like the Rambam, he is a kaifer and an apikoros on Iker number 12. Like Rav Albo, as long as he's maimin in Tzchar V'Einish, if he doesn't believe in Mashiach or Gehenna or whatever it is, that's a mistaken belief, but it's not a heretical belief. So as I say, it's hard to know. There's a hachra here. I mean, in the Torah world, by and large, Gedolim always say maimin in the 13 Ikrei Emunah, but it's not a davar pasha that's a halacha psuka. I mean, there was a great guy in Yerushalayim who was truly a great guy, not so well known in many circles. Rav Shlomo Fisher, Zecharno Levracha, rest assured, chashuv sheba chashuvim. And he used to say that, who says, why is it a davar pashat that the halacha is like the Rambam? The Rambam has a shita of Ikrei Emunah. There were other Rishonim who had different shitas about Ikrei Emunah. What is the hechrich that the halacha is necessarily like the Rambam? Again, this is Rav Shlomo Fisher, but as I say, in the Torah world, we commonly say the Rambam is the last day in this. He tainted it was not mochrich. Yeah.
How does legally Nishmas work? If I make a mizonos for someone else's grandfather, how does that give him an aliyah? By the same token, can I make an avera and have a rida?
I'm doing an avera. It's my revenge against him. I'm going to drag him down. Yeah. So it's a very good question. Now, Rav Hai Gaon actually said, Rav Hai Gaon, the greatest of the Gaonim, actually said, there is no such thing as doing a mitzvah for another person. A person is either dead or alive. Everybody is judged on their mitzvahs and on their averos. I can't do a mitzvah for somebody else's benefit. Other than, he says, the one exception is a son can do it for a parent. That's a special rule because son and parent are connected. But the stam, as I say, I'm doing this, le'iloi nishmas somebody, Rav Hai Gaon says you can't do it. Now, Rav Chaim Kanevsky says the way it could work is the following way, and that is Hashem is continuously judging people who died, right? I mean, we say every yahrzeit, Hashem judges a person again. Now, you may say, well, what is Hashem judging a person? A person died 100 years ago. His mitzvos and averos were finished 100 years ago. What is this notion of continuous judgment? So Rav Chaim Volozhiner explains that there are ripple effects in our actions. The good that we do continues to produce effects over time. Children, grandchildren, talmidim, talmidei, and chas v'shalom, the bad that we do. If I turned off one person from Yiddishkeit, let's assume my behavior drove a person away from the derech HaTorah. So now I drove one person away from Torah. That's very bad. But in the course of time, all of the people in his family who would have been from had I not driven him away. So there's a constant judgment of ripple effects. That's Rav Chaim Volozhiner. So Rav Chaim Kanievsky said like this: if I am learning only because of this nifter, and I wouldn't have learned except for this nifter, then this nifter will get the suchus of my learning because I am the reason. I'm sorry, not I am. He is the reason that I'm doing it. And because of this, Rav Chaim said a very logical chiddush. You can't dedicate learning l'zecher nishmas somebody if you would have been doing that learning anyway. You can't say, you have a morning seder, you learn every morning. You cannot say, I am learning this morning l'zecher nishmas somebody. Because it's only shayach l'zecher nishmas if he is the reason that you're doing it, and without him, you wouldn't be doing it. See? But if lamaisa, I'm learning even 5 minutes extra because of him, then his life had a ripple effect that resulted in extra learning, and that's the zechus that he can get from it. Yeah.
Is it usher if someone knows the halacha that Shulchan Aruch, for example, paskin according to the Tur Savana and the Gemara, and someone also knows that the Rambam paskins according to different Havana and the Gemara, is it usher for somebody who knows what the Shulchan Aruch says to paskin according to the Rambam just because should I say better, what is the usher exactly if he paskins according to the Rambam, if he knows the halacha that the Shulchan Aruch does not paskin?
Yeah.
Tim, for example, is it as if he broke halacha? The second part is there any difference if he knows the halacha and it was just a shas hadchak? And also, part 3 is, so for example, Chabadniks that learn a lot of Rambam, they may not necessarily know how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. Someone doesn't know the halacha how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. What's the situation then?
Yeah. So the basic question you're asking is, we often say the definition of a frum yid is somebody who follows the Shulchan Aruch, let's say with the Ramah, let's say, right? Right. So the question is, why is that so? I mean, we have Gemara. The Gemara gives us many opinions. There's machloksim rishonim how to interpret the Gemara. And like some Rishonim, the halacha is going to be a certain way. Like other Rishonim, the halacha is going to be another way. The Shulchan Aruch happens to be machriya, like a particular interpretation of the sugya. And when I say Shulchan Aruch, I'm including Ramah and the like. But there are other interpretations of the sugya, and there are other Rishonim who come out a different way. By the way, b'derech klal, the Shulchan Aruch will follow the Rambam, because Rabbi Yosef Karo had a famous rule of 3. Is the 3 poskim that he looked at is Rif, Rambam, and Rush, and he was machriya the halacha based on 2 out of 3, and the Rif and the Rambam are almost always the same. So okay, but whatever. But your general question is still a very, very good question. So the truth of the matter is, some understand that Klal Yisrael was makabel, that the Shulchan Aruch is the posek acharon, and therefore it becomes like a minhag of Klal Yisrael that we have to follow the Shulchan Aruch. But the emes is the Vilna Gaon said not that way. The Vilna Gaon actually said, if you are an individual, now this may be a very high level, who is capable of independently determining what the halacha should be based on your learning of the sugyas, now that's a very high level. That's a very high level. That's a level of a person who knows Shas and Rishonim and is able to use his svara to determine what is the most logical mahalech. He says you actually have reshus to be machriya keneged the Shulchan Aruch, because you're called higia lahira. Now, most of us are not higia lahira. Again, a person might know the Mishnah Rura by heart. That does not mean he's higia lahira. Higia lahira means he can look at the sugyas and he can determine what is the most logical approach. But the Vilna Gaon said, even today, such a person has rishus. And I will tell you, I know that there were Yechidim, there were Gedolim, Ashkenazi Gedolim, who followed the Piskei Rambam, even Keneged the Shulchan Aruch. I think one outstanding example was a Litvisher guy, and he was not Teimani. Teimanim have a different Messiah. Teimanim follow the Rambam anyway. That's their Messiah. But Ashkenazim don't follow the Rambam. Ashkenazim follow Shulchan Aruch and Ramah. But one Gadol who followed the Piskei Rambam, even Keneged the Shulchan Aruch, was Rav Yisrael Zalman Meltzer. Rav Zalman Meltzer was an Ashkenazi Litvisher Rosh Yeshiva who was in Eretz Yisrael. He was the father-in-law of Rav Aaron Kotler. He was one of the true Gedolei Hador. His sefer is Even HaEzel, which is multiple volumes on the Rambam. And he took the position that since he spent his life being ma'ayin in the Rambam, he looked at the Rambam as his Rabbi Mufak, his main Rebbe, and therefore he felt he was allowed to paskin like the Rambam in his life, but he never told his Talmidim to do that. So there is room, meaning the Shulchan Aruch is not automatically the final thing that you got to go with. I mean, after all, think about this. Sometimes even the commentaries of the Shulchan Aruch say not to follow it. The Shach, the Taz. So people say, well, they'll say something like, well, when we say the Shulchan Aruch is binding, we mean the Shulchan Aruch and all the commentaries that are printed on the page with the Shulchan Aruch. Well, I mean, that's kind of artificial. I mean, why? Because it's printed on the page? There's something, in other words, if it's not printed on the page, if it's just a separate sefer, that's not authoritative. But if it's printed on the page, well, what if it's in the back? Now, Prima Gunnim is usually, except in the newer Shulchan Aruch, Prima Gunnim is not printed on the page, it's in the back. Well, okay, but it's in the volume. What, are you going to tell me that somehow the definition of what is halachically binding depends on whether it's on the page or on the back, or whether it's a separate sefer? That's not that sensible. But there is a musag that Higiyah L'Hayra has a certain freedom. And that's why the Naisei Kalim themselves will sometimes not paskin like the Shulchan Aruch or the Ramah. Yeah.
My question was really more, not just for Gedolim, but for someone like an average yeshiva bacher. He heard that the Rambam says X, or even read the Rambam says X, and he read Shulchan Aruch paskin according to Rishon Y.
Yeah.
And he just decided from his far, like, hey, I like the Rambam better.
Yeah.
Why would that be wrong? Is that like considered he broke halacha?
Well, again, it's hard to know. After 120 years, when Hashem asks you, why didn't you do this? And you say, I followed the Rambam. I'm not sure you'll get in big trouble for it. The Rambam is the Rambam. But still, I think it's makubal. It's been accepted in Klal Yisrael that unless you're a person who is capable of independent halachic judgment, the Shulchan Aruch is your default setting. In other words, your default setting. You shouldn't just make your own judgment not to follow the Shulchan Aruch. Now, if it is a shasat chak, if it's an emergency situation, if there are truly extenuating circumstances, even then you should talk to a Rav or a posek about it, but then there are grounds to follow the Rambam or other Rishonim. But as I say, it normally shouldn't be something you do on your own. This is something that is a fairly serious thing, and you need to check it out with someone. Yeah.
How much chesed should we be doing? How should we balance learning and doing chesed?
Yeah. So again, Pirkei Avos says, right, the world Shimon HaTzadik, our street. Al shleisha devarim ha'olam haimei Torah Avodah Gemilas Chasadim. You need 3 pillars. You need chesed, you need avodah. So the truth of the matter is, in the girls' schools, they have all sorts of chesed projects and everything else. The yeshivos, not so much. So it is an interesting issue, because on one hand, we commonly tell B'nai Torah in yeshiva that you should spend virtually all of your time in learning and some time in davening. And, we don't necessarily talk about chesed. I think that's a chisaron. But one way out of it is to understand that in your learning, there's a lot of chesed you can do, particularly in a place like Ohr Somayach. You have people of different backgrounds. So you could offer to learn with somebody a little weaker than you. You help them out. When you clean the base medrash, svarim, you're doing chesed. So there are opportunities of chesed even here. And a person who's a pikeach, if you're thinking about it, you should be seeking out some opportunities of chesed. Having said that, though, I think that in your years in yeshiva, your primary focus needs to be on learning, because as you get into life, you get into work, you get into other things, you'll have less and less time to learn. So you just need to absorb as much as you can. You can't kind of say, you shouldn't say, I'm dividing my day in thirds. A third davening, a third learning, a third chesed. Although there's value to that too, but I think you need to put more emphasis on learning, because full-time learning is not something that most of us will have our whole lives. So we need to take advantage of the time that we have, because it is rare and it's going to pass. Yeah.
In Shabbat, the Chovos Levavos seems to say that if you, let's say, believe in chance, like I have a 50% chance of picking the right coin, and Hashem's going to talk a different way. So the question is, first of all, why? Hashem created it like that. Also, if a person believes in a cruel God, meaning it's not chance, he believes God's going to mess him over whenever he gets a chance to, is Hashem going to go and assume that position?
Yeah. So this is a very important idea in the Chovos Levavos, that Hashem interacts with us based on the belief system, based on the image that we have of Hashem. In other words, these things become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I believe that Hashem is not involved in my life and things happen just by mikra, by accident or coincidence, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is misalek, his hashgacha, and things happen to me by coincidence. In a way, I get confirmed in my erroneous belief. My erroneous belief becomes the truth of my life. If I believe HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mashkiach and everything that I do, l'tayv, then indeed it's more likely, although there may be other cheshbainis, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be dealing with me in that way. Now, you asked two questions. Question number one is, why did Hashem create that particular system? And your second question is, could this work, God forbid, in a negative way? If a person is convinced, Rahman al-Islam, that God is cruel, meaning, yeah, God is controlling everything, but I believe he's sadistic, will that mean that God will be sadistic towards me? Legabe, the second question, let me tell you something. I think not. I think Hashem's racham is such that he's not going to bedafka hurt you because you think he's sadistic. Meaning, it's one thing for Hashem to say, I'm going to not get involved because you think I'm not involved. I don't think HaKadosh Baruch Hu was ever going to be an active sadist. That would be keneged the nature of Hashem. Okay, but why does Hashem create the world that way? I think it goes back to the Nefesh HaChaim. The Nefesh HaChaim says in Shar Aleph that Hashem created the world. We are in the image of God, right? We are B'Tselem Elokim. The Chumash says B'Tselem Elokim. So says Rav Chaim of Volozhiner, we are godlike because Hashem made a system where we, Kaviyachal, have a certain control over Hashem. Meaning to say, we determine if Hashem will be mashpia brachos or onshim by our actions. Meaning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu always wants to give. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a pipeline system where the opening of the pipe is up to us. And that's the meaning of the pasuk we say every day in davening, Tanu Aish Leilokim, which literally means give strength to God. We empower Hashem. So Hashem basically says, you control how I'm going to act with you. That's the idea of you're godly. You are godly because you have shalita kaviyachal, even over HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's a pella, but that in a way is the highest compliment, that God ranks us up there with him in controlling the flow of divine energy in the universe. Yeah.
Torah, when describing the Imo, it always describes them as very beautiful. And there are also different chazal, let's say, with other like woman characters, let's say Rachav, the Gemara says that call Omer Rachav Me'anikriya, how beautiful she was. I'm trying to understand what's the point, I guess, of chazal, and also the Torah, of course, describing their beauty. I guess what's the function of beauty, of women's beauty in general in Judaism?
Yeah, so the question is why this is broken down today. Clearly, in an ideal world of pure ruchnius, the physical would be an expression of a panemius that is inside a person, meaning to say the holiness, the goodness within a person would manifest itself in a physical surah. And therefore, when you saw somebody who was extraordinarily beautiful, that was a siman of something inside of them. This was the outgrowth. This was like the klipa, the peel, as it were, of an inner fruit. So as a result, from the Torah's perspective, when we describe the Imos as beautiful, even outside, that was a reference to an outgrowth of a panemius. The problem we have is that we don't necessarily see that today, where you have whole industries that are based on physical beauty that does not necessarily correspond to a beauty that is bifnim. So the question is, when did that kilkel happen? Meaning, when did the physical get disassociated from the spiritual so that physical beauty would no longer be a great maila? But again, this is an aspect of chait, that eventually what chatoim do is chatoim drive a wedge between the guf and the neshama. So the development of the guf is no longer mechubar to the development of the neshama. But even then, if you're asking me what is the role of beauty, so here's something I once saw. This is a little bit cute, a little bit risque. This was a video with the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, you know, when he would give out dollars and people would wait in line to talk to him for a few minutes. So a woman came, and she was the winner. She was Miss Israel in a beauty pageant. Of course, she came properly dressed, Baruch Hashem, and she was totally tzanua. But she goes to the Rebbe and says, "Oh, you know, I'm, you know, Miss Universe. I'm in a beauty pageant. I'm a champion of a beauty pageant." So what did the Rebbe say? The Rebbe said, it says in Mishlei, Eishes Chayil, Sheker Achein v'Hevel HaYofi, that beauty is false and worthless. Isha Yiras Hashem Hi Tesalo. It is a woman who fears God that is worthy of praise. So the Rebbe types it up this way. Beauty is false and futile unless it is linked with Yiras Hashem. But when it's Yiras Hashem Hi Tesalo, then the chen becomes a beautiful thing as well. So beauty has its place. Beauty has its place. But only when it's linked to Yiras Hashem. We find it by Yefes, Yavan coming up. Noach gave a bracha to Yefes, who was the father of Yavan, Greece. Great Greece was into beauty, culture. Yaftel lekim liyefes. Hashem gives beauty to Yefes. V'yishkain b'olei Shem, but only when it dwells in the tent of Shem. Shem means monotheism, godliness. Shem ben Noach. Right? So beauty has a makam when it's connected to everything else. Yeah.
I have a sending from my father.
Oh, okay.
I'm being vague on purpose.
Yeah.
He asked me with everything that's going on, October 7th, and the different enemies that their power, like the entities that are in power are no longer in power. What's really going on?
What's really going on? You know, they say, ask God, you know. Listen, we know that Gedolei Yisrael are telling us that these are Chavlei Mashiach. These are the birth pains of Mashiach. Now, that doesn't mean I can tell you Mashiach is coming tomorrow or the next day or this week. No, that we don't know. But clearly there is a process of upheaval. The world is going crazy. Things are being shook around, shaken around in amazing things. Even Trump's election, good or bad, whatever your political orientation is, I think most religious Jews are happy about it, but whatever it is a miracle. You know, the guy gets like four convictions against him, 36 felonies, 2 assassination attempts, 6 states wanted, whatever it is. Hashem is showing us that anything can happen in a crazy world. And that's an important lesson, because when we realize how HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, and in a second everything can change, then we're ready for the light of Mashiach. Because as long as we're filled with the gaiva, that we think we control things, Mashiach can't come. Because our gaiva keeps the Eibishter out of the world, as the Gemara in Saita says. So I think what's going on is Hashem is showing us, you have no idea. You know, you think you control things. You don't control anything. I mean, this started with COVID, right? We have this great medical technology, and this Chinese virus, like, closes down the world. for 2 or 3 years. And after COVID, basically comes October 7th. And then the American elections, and then the fall of Syria. And then Hezbollah and Hamas and all of these things. What we're showing is we are not in control of anything. Now, for some people, that's going to drive you crazy. For other people, if I'm not in control, then I know it's Hashem. If I know it's Hashem, I don't worry. Now, maybe in the short term, in terms of an individual thing, things can happen to individuals. That's sad and tragic. But in terms of the overall direction of the world, it's going where HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants it to go. And that's a very, very big insight. Again, we should be zeicha. I mean, Chavlei Mashiach are difficult. But we should be zeicha to see the birth, not just the chavalim. Yeah.
How can we, if at all, be mechanic other people's children instead of running around shul or whatever?
How you mechanech other people's kids running around shul?
Let's say, or on a positive note, teach them something maybe that if you want to teach them Hasidus and the father's a couple of times.
Well, the truth of the matter is, if it's someone else's kids, you are a little bit limited in what you can do. But there are things you can do. You can have, candy in your pockets, and as you give a kid a candy, you can tell them a vort from the Alter Rebbe or something. There are ways you sneak things in. You build a relationship. And then you offer to learn with kids. If you want, you offer to... Again, when I say learn with kids, I don't mean, a 3-hour Shabbos afternoon Seder. Learn with kids can be 5 minutes or 10 minutes, in which they sit and you say, hey, listen, you sit with me for 10 minutes, I'll give you some candy. And you can give them a really good feeling. I mean, I remember myself growing up, experiences like that, like short, little connections with, Talmidei Chachamim or B'nai Yeshiva. And that was very important to me growing up. So you can do those little kisharim. And, parents are always grateful if you are nice to their kids. So I don't think, even a Kalto Litvak is not going to protest too much if you... of course, if you're Chabad, remember, the Alter Rebbe was called the Litvak, and that's what he was. Yitzchak was a Litvak, although not a Kalto Litvak. Yeah.
So this week's parasha mentions in the English commentary that the soul of Tamar's first husband was supposed to gain a new life through Yibum by his brother. The commentary doesn't address whether the two kids eventually born to Tamar through an unwitting Yibum with Judah, or perhaps the reincarnated brothers who both died for refusing to have kids with her. This leaves people to have on whether the mitzvah of Yibum is also additionally an avenue for Hashem to send back to send a man back to be his wife's son if he failed or declined Peru, or whether the skittish
No, it's exactly the opposite. It's exactly as you said in your question. The whole idea of Yibum is to kind of effect a kind of reincarnation of the man who died without children, that in effect his neshama should be reborn in the child that has from his wife. But again, it's a reincarnation into a son, meaning like this. It's not the actual husband that is he is reincarnated in the same way he would be reincarnated in a son that he has, meaning in many, many ways, the son of the Yavam is actually the son of the neshama of the person who died, of the brother, right? So his soul is reincarnated in his posterity, in his children that are born from his brother. Of course, let me just remind you that obviously Yehuda was not a Yavam, Yehuda was not a brother, Yehuda was a father. The Ramban makes the interesting point that before Matan Torah, this mysterious transmigration of soul could be affected by any relative, that the Torah changed the rules and only allowed it brother, but pre-Yibum Matan Torah did include even a father.
So it's not a literal reincarnation?
It's not it's a reincarnation in the same way that having a son is a perpetuation of your soul. When you have a child, so your soul is continued. That's what we mean by reincarnation. Yeah.
I believe we said before that all mitzvos are inherently good, all things they're inherently good. In the mitzvos Yashar, in Tahara, it talks about shalom, and the lowest level of that is where someone does it completely without an intention of Hashem. He just wants money, covet, whatever. And it talks very badly about that type of person. He shouldn't have been born or whatever. So is that inherently good?
You know, there's a huge machlokas about this, because once again, we have the text of the Gemara that says that a person should always learn Torah and do mitzvos, even not lishma, because by doing it not lishma, you eventually come to lishma.
In the second level.
No. So what I'm saying is, that's the Ramchal's interpretation, meaning to say, that's where you're going to get into a big machlokas. There are those who actually learn that any level of shalom lishma, even osher, kavod, and the like, is mitoch shalom lishma, bal lishma, and therefore it's intrinsically good. Then you have people like the Ramchal and the Gra, I would say as well. By the way, the Gra was a great admirer of the Ramchal, so it's not unusual that they would have the same opinion, that this only applies to people who are not acting out of the basest, lowest motives, or a little higher. So I would have to say that it is a machlokas how to learn the Gemara in Pesachim, meaning the Ramchal's explanation is an explanation. It's not mukhrach from the Gemara, but it is an interpretation, and there are those who are a little more makel about that. Yeah.
We're always told that Hashem loves us unconditionally. How do we reconcile this with the fact that so many times Hashem is depicted as a punishing and exacting God? Furthermore, if Hashem loves us unconditionally, why is He ready to wipe us out in the Torah multiple times?
Yeah. So the first question is a little easier than the second question. The fact that God is portrayed as a God who punishes, and not only is He portrayed, but we've experienced numerous punishments, galus and chorban and Holocaust. So the Torah itself gives the key to that question by saying, as a parent chastises his son, so Hashem will chastise you. Now, granted, it seems harsh, but it's clear that all of the sorrows and all of the Yisurin that Hashem brings to Bnei Yisrael, in ways we don't always fathom, are really Hashem's love. Hashem cares for us. Hashem wants us to be the best that we can be. And sometimes that means tough love. Sometimes that means not compromising. Sometimes that means not giving us a pass, because we matter too much. Our lives are too important. Our mission is too significant. So in ways we don't fully understand, the same way that a tough coach might say, run around the track, 100 times to build up your lungs, or whatever it is, Hashem puts us through the ringer. And the Chumash describes this as the discipline of a loving parent to a child. Now, but your second question is a little harder. When Hashem literally says, I want to wipe you out, well, there you can't really say it's a loving thing. He's going to get rid of us and make a deal with Moshe Rabbeinu. So here, it's a little more difficult, but it seems to be. But Chazal themselves describe this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is stating something that He's actually not planning on doing, because He wants Moshe Rabbeinu to daven. Meaning Hashem kind of knows the story, and Hashem wants to create an extreme situation so that Moshe Rabbeinu will be ma'orer the midas harachamim. Because after all, if Hashem really just wanted to destroy us, He could have just done it. Like, why does He have to tell Moshe, this is what I'm going to do? The answer is, He's telling Moshe what He's going to do because He knows what Moshe Rabbeinu is going to do at this point. So it's almost like Hashem is looking for opportunities to be ma'orer the koach of tefillah, and thereby be ma'orer the koach of rachamim. But He would never, as I say, ultimately He would not destroy the Jewish people. Yeah.
I'm not sure where exactly it says it, but I feel like it says somewhere that Hashem is the greatest giver. If you ask me, like a millionaire that gives me $100 or a poor person that gives me $5, I'd value the $5 more. So he's not really losing anything when he gives.
Oh, so you're saying that even if Hashem gives us gazillions upon gazillions upon gazillions, it's very little. What do they say? That's the joke they say, that a person needed money and he says to Hashem, Hashem, why can't you give me $1 million? $1 million is like a penny to you. It's a penny, a penny, a penny. Can't you give me a penny? So Hashem says, sure, wait a minute. Because, for $1 million is a penny, infinity is a minute. You wait a minute, I'll give you a penny. It's a good horror. I mean, if you define giving based on sacrificing, I don't have a terrorist. I mean, his time is, how can Hashem be a giver if Hashem is not sacrificing anything, if Hashem is not giving up anything? I don't know. I have to think about it. It's a good horror. But certainly, in terms of what we are getting, we have to be makar tov. We sometimes think, hey, I didn't get such a good deal. But you have to appreciate life. You have to appreciate life. Rabbi Chasman, one of the great Baalei Musar, once said, if you remember Yaina, the story of Yaina, we read on Yom Kippur. So there was a big storm, and they did a lottery, and it turns out Yaina is responsible why Hashem is going to sink the ship. So Yaina, halachically it's very complicated, but Yaina said, lift me up and throw me overboard, because I'm the one that's endangering the ship. So the lashon of the pasuk is, Sa'uni, lift me up and throw me overboard. So Sa'uni is an extra phrase. You could have just said, throw me overboard. Why Sa'uni? So Rabbi Chasman used to say, because if Yaina says, lift me up and then throw me overboard, he's gaining an extra 2 seconds of life. That life is such a gift that for 2 seconds, you say, it's kedai to have 2 seconds. The Ger Tzedek of Vilna. You know the story of the Ger Tzedek of Vilna. We don't have time for the whole story, but this was a non-Jew from the richest family in Poland, Potocki family. Mamish. And he became a ger, and he was living in secrecy, more or less, but his whereabouts got revealed, and he was burnt at the stake the second day of Shavuos in Vilna. His ashes were buried next to the Vilna Gaon, the Ger Tzedek of Vilna. And the Vilna Gaon visited him the night before his execution. I guess that was on Shavuos. And the Vilna Gaon said, I can do nisim. I could pronounce Kabbalistic stuff and get you out of here. Do you want me to do that? So he asked the Vilna Gaon, am I mechuyev? In other words, am I mechuyev to save my life by miraculous means? Pikuach nefesh. So the Vilna Gaon told him, La halacha, you're not mechuyev to use nisim. Meaning, la halacha, you're mechuyev to save yourself in natural ways. You're not mechuyev to use supernatural ways. So the Ger Tzedek says, Bazai, I would rather die al Kiddush Hashem. As if I'm not mechuyev to use an ace, I would die al Kiddush Hashem. He then asked the Vilna Gaon another shaila. When they lead me out to be burnt at the stake, and I'm going to fulfill Kiddush Hashem, right? I'm dying because of my emunah in Hashem. Should I run or should I walk as slowly as I can? On one hand, maybe I should run, because zerizim makdimim lemitzvos. When you do a mitzvah, you do it as quickly as you can. On the other hand, maybe I should walk as slowly as I can, because each second of life is also a mitzvah. So I want to live a few extra seconds. So here, and this must be the only time in history, the Vilna Gaon said he didn't know he has to think about it. The Gra himself said he was not machriya. But it's makubal that as the Ger Tzedek was being paraded through the streets of Vilna to the fire, the Vilna Gaon stuck out his head and says, you should run. So people didn't know what he was referring to, but based on the discussion later, that was reported later, people understood that the Gra held, you should run, but there was at least a havamina, that every second of life is so precious that you actually go, even when you're going to your death, you should go as slowly as you can. Okay, maybe we'll stop here and have a good catch-up.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.